Hi, it's Miss Howard. I'm here to talk you through some of my favorite reads that are in my library and some that I have just read recently. Some I've had for years and passed along to students for years. But you're going to be picking a book this week, so I wanted to show you some of the things that I have available for you to read. First up is Beartown by Frederick Bachman. This is one of my favorite reads to suggest to students. Students who thought they hated to read, forgot that they loved to read, pick this book up. And it also has a sequel, and they are flying through the pages of this one and the next one. There is something about Beartown that just gets everybody who picks it up to read it. So it's a book set in a Swedish town, which I thought, I'm not going to know anything about that, but it's so relatable. And the town is obsessed with hockey. Like the whole town's lives and revolve around hockey. And it follows the story of several boys, Kevin, Amat, and Benji, and the rest of the boys on the team. They are in the national semifinals. They actually have a shot at winning. They're a little scrappy underdog team. Lots of your typical teammate relationships happen in this book. But something has happened to the coach's daughter, and one of the boys is accused of it. And it becomes something that separates the town, which is more important. The way we treat people and the way we take care of other people, or the sport that this town loves, the sport that this town lives for. So this one has a lot of drama in it. There is a brief scene of sexual assault that doesn't go into graphic detail, but it does create a picture for you of what happens to the female character in this book. So know that before you go in, that is a part of what you might read. But Beartown is such a good book, and it just shows you a lot about human relationships. So I love that one. The next one I'm going to talk to you about is Frankly in Love. I love a good romance. And Frankly in Love by David Yoon is such a great book. Look at how beautiful it is, too. It's just a pretty book. But Frankly in Love is about a Korean-American boy named Frank Lee. His given Korean name is Sung Min Lee. And his family regards their Korean-American heritage very highly. And they want him to date a Korean-American girl. But Frank Lee falls in love with a white girl named Britt. And he really wants to date her. He really likes her. So he has to find a way to make that happen. So he sets up a fake Korean-American dating ring among his friends, and they pretend like they're dating each other so that they can go on dates with people who aren't Korean-American. And it's all about acceptance. It's about it's a teenage love story. There's not much to worry about in terms of content. Here's a sweet, innocent story. There might be a little bit of language, but it's real and it's authentic, and it'll make you laugh. It'll make you feel a little embarrassed. It'll make you fall in love with Frank Lee. It's so good. So this is a really good one if you're looking for just a good love story. Super sweet. The next one is by my favorite author, which you'll hear me talk about all the time, Jason Reynolds. He is my hero. This is Jason Reynolds. Whoops, right here. He is you can barely see him. He is the National Ambassador for Children's Literature with the Library of Congress. And he writes in ways that can engage anyone. And Long Way Down is written sort of like poetry in these smaller chunks. And Long Way Down follows the story of a young boy named Will, whose older brother Sean has been shot dead in the neighborhood. And so Will wants revenge. And so Will is in his apartment building thinking how he can get that revenge on the people that killed his brother. And he hops on the elevator with his family's gun, going to get revenge. And along the way, he stops on every floor. And on every floor, someone, and you'll be very interested to find out who those people are because it's fascinating. Someone steps on the elevator to talk him through this decision to get revenge. It's powerful. It's gripping. It makes you want to turn the page. You could probably read it in a day if you got real comfortable. Jason Reynolds is amazing. Great book. This one I've bought, I think, 4 copies for my classroom because it's been borrowed and beat up and well loved, or a student wanted to keep it. I've gone through multiple copies because this one gets in the hands of students so often. So it's a great one. Another one is called 10 Blind Dates, another sweet little innocent love story. Ashley Elston, you may have read her in 9th grade. With the book This Is Our Story. So you read that murder mystery. This is nothing like that. Ashley Elston is actually neighbors with my aunt, so I've gotten to know her through that. But she's a great published author. She's written This Is Our Story, The Lying Woods, and 10 Blind Dates is her first romance. And so it actually takes place just down the road from where I grew up. This takes place in northern Louisiana. And a girl named Sophie is going to spend Christmas with her family in South Louisiana. And she and her boyfriend, a long-term boyfriend, break up right before she goes. So she goes down to South Louisiana to see her family. She's sad. They know it. And they want to do everything they can to make her happy. So her Nana, her grandmother, sets her up, or her family members split it up and set her up on 10 blind dates. And some of them are so embarrassing and so funny and so typical. And you'll be surprised about some of these dates. So sweet little romance, so funny, so cute. Sophie is such a likable character. You'll love that one. The next one is Dig. I just finished this one last week by A.S. King. I'd seen this book in lots of places. Everybody was recommending it, and I was about 75 pages in, and I still had no idea what I was reading. It's almost written like a play. There are multiple storylines happening at once. With lots of different characters of different genders, characters of different generations, lots of different characters, and they're telling these separate stories, but ultimately the story starts to come together in the last 100 pages, and I was flying through the pages at the end. There's a little bit of a mystery in it, but all of their stories converge and are related to each other. And it's so fascinating. There's one character here who I just loved, and the characters have weird names, and her name was Can I Help You? She works at Arby's. And so since her perspective, I have thought of the way I treat people in drive-thrus now, because she talks about how rude people are to her in drive-thrus. So this one stuck with me. It's a good one, kind of shocking. There is some language here. There is brief mention of drug use here. So if those sorts of things bother you and you don't want to read them, this is probably not the book for you. But it is nothing that is too graphic. Again, great book. I highly suggest it. It brings up a lot of issues that are happening in our country right now, which makes it an even better read. This one is just a beautiful book called Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I mean, look at the cover. When you take off the cover, look at how pretty that book is. It's just a gorgeous one, which I'm not going to lie is why I picked it up. I like pretty books. And then I ended up falling in love with this book. Elizabeth Acevedo wrote The Poet X and With the Fire on High, if you've heard of either of those books. But this book is also kind of written in the poetry form, so you can fly through it very quickly. And it's about 2 sisters, Camino Rios and Yahira Rios. Camino lives in the Dominican Republic, and Yahira lives in New York. The 2 do not know they're sisters, but they share the same father. And when their father dies, they are brought together, and the chaos that ensues and the conflict that ensues from that. But then ultimately the relationship that develops from that is so beautiful. I loved this book and read it this summer. This one is by George Takei called They Called Us Enemy. And we've talked about last week, talking about parts of our history that often get left out. And this is a graphic novel by George Takei. And he spent time in an Arkansas internment camp, Japanese internment camp. And this was following World War II, and the internment camp was in Arkansas. It's called Rower. I've actually driven through there before. But Japanese internment camps are a part of our history that we do acknowledge, but it's a part that most of us don't learn much about in school. And it's a sad part of our history. But George Takei writes about his experience in the internment camp and what it was like to be a Japanese American boy following World War II. It's powerful, it's sad, but it's hopeful, and it shows the courage and loyalty and love that we see so often in our country. So it's a great book. And then my last one, the reason why it's biggest on this slide you see behind you, is this brand new book that just came out last week called Punching the Air. I read it in a day. It blew my mind and comes highly recommended by Jason Reynolds, my favorite. It's by Ibiza Boy, who has written several books. American Street and Pride are her two most famous titles, but it's also co-written by Yusuf Salam, who was one of the Central Park Five. So he was convicted of a brutal crime that happened in Central Park, and he was 15 years old when that happened, and he was wrongfully accused. And ultimately, after spending years in prison, they spent most of their life behind bars. He helped co-write this story. So this is a fictional story, but based very much on Yusuf Salam's real experience about Amal Shahid. He was an artist and a poet, a high school student who was involved in a really bad fight in his neighborhood. And one of the kids in the fight ended up being severely injured. And Amal Shahid, sorry, I'm getting some names of the characters mixed up. But Amal Shahid was convicted and sent to juvenile detention. And he writes about his experience in prison as a juvenile offender, what it took to survive his time there. It, too, is also written in poetry, and it includes some beautiful art as well, because the main character, Amal, is an artist and a poet. And he documents his time in prison. He documents his experience of knowing he is not guilty, but serving time for a crime he did not commit, and what that does to him mentally and physically and emotionally is one of the most powerful stories I have ever heard. If you've ever seen the show on Netflix called When They See Us by Ava DuVernay, that tells the story of the Central Park Five, which is the story of Yusuf Salam and what he experienced when he was convicted. And it is beautiful. There is a little bit of language, but the poetry and the use of language is so well done. I highly suggest this one. So these are some of my favorite titles. I'll also suggest a longer list of some other genres if you're interested in fantasy or science fiction or books about sports or nonfiction books. I'll have a list below this that you can look at. But those are just some of my favorites. And if you would like to check them out, there is a Google form. You can request them from me, and I will have them ready for you, and you can drop by BHS and pick them up. My job is to get books in your hand, and I'm excited to share my books with you. So if you have any questions about any of these, email me and let me know. And if you'd like to request them, I only have one copy of each, so we may have to take some turns. But if you are interested in checking out one of these books, just let me know.